Okay, today we're going to take a look at this leatherback turtle with the little fish going out over the reef there, and we're going to use Arches hot pressed. This is 140 weight, and I'm going to show you how to set it up so that you have the feeling of it being underwater. And my first step is to get the paper down on this oldie wood board here, and I generally like to tape the edges pretty close, but I want the edges to be white and clean, even though I'll be using a matte later. And this will hold the paper flat as it gets wet. Stop. Okay, now we're going to have drawn the shape of the turtle here, and I'm using Winsor Newton masking fluid and I use a little bit of red pigment just so I can see where I'm painting the masking fluid, and then blocking out the entire turtle, and just using little shapes to indicate where the fish will be later. One of the things important about this technique is to block out completely those areas that you don't want the water to get into, because it will stain and color wherever the water gets into. Okay, now we'll use the dryer to make sure all the Our next step will be to wet the entire area. I use a 3-inch hack brush, pretty well used, and I'll be using 3 colors in this step to make the background water. I'll be using a Winsor Newton French Ultramarine, Payne's Gray by Winsor Newton, and eventually we'll make the background for the turtle out of Winsor Newton Winsor Yellow, which is all very pure colors, and they're expensive, but you get what you pay for. Now I want the feeling of the reef in the background, but I want the feeling of the top of the water, and in order to do that, I'm going to be painting back with pretty heavy Winsor Newton, trying to keep it lighter at the top, and you can see where the little fish are going to be, and I just will leave those striations there that the hack brush creates, and I'll try to make the bottom here much darker. You see the reef is already showing up. And I'll just let the striations kind of settle themselves down, letting the paint do most of the work here, and that's enough for that. I'll just give this a brief dry. Alright, so that's our first wash, and now that it's dry, you see it lightened up quite a bit. All we have to do to get a value is to put the picture here, and you can see that this is considerably darker, and we'll need to protect some of this area down in here, but this can go quite a bit darker than it is. So on the second wash, I'm going to do a similar thing with fresh water, and you would think this would hurt the first wash, but it doesn't. You see, just go right across the first wash, and now I'm going to add considerable density right along where I want that ridge to be, and I'm going to protect the striations that have been going on and allow the watercolor to just sit now. Instead of tilting the board, I want that little area like that to delineate the back of the reef there. All right, after 2 washes and 2 dryings, you can see we're getting the density here. I'm going to be lightening up this area by doing a technique called lifting. I'm going to try to lift out just that section there and here, and then put a dark Payne's gray as a shadow underneath the turtle. Now, this has to be actually dry to the touch before lifting works. And lifting is quite an old technique. It's just a matter of brushing it wet where you want it to lighten, and I want this area to lighten up quite a bit. So I'm going to go right here, and then after it sits just a while there, I will come in with the paper towel and lift that out. And you only get about 2 swipes of this, so you can see how that's lifting out in that corner. I'll go here and maybe up a little bit in there, and I'll lift that out. Now you only get to lift with totally clean paper, totally clean paper towels, and you only get to lift about half of the value that's there at a time. Then you need to dry it, but you can see how much that's come up. Now we've got the suggestion of that shadow, and I'm going to increase that suggestion by adding Payne's gray to my mixture and coming right underneath and letting that just become its own shadow underneath the turtle. I don't use it everywhere. I just need it to give me the value to be increased. Now, I can feather that off by adding more water to it, so it's not quite so hard. But I want to leave that lighter area for later foliage. So we're just putting a little bit of dark shadow, combining the aquamarine blue and the Payne's gray, so we get the density going. Okay, so we have the shadow blending in. Now's the time to bring out our coral color, our first wash on the coral, which we're going to later modify, but we just want to get in a value system going. Of course, the highlights are going to be where the blockout is, and then another dry. Okay, before picking up the mastic, I wanted to check, see what our brush would do, adding some little characters along the bottom. This is about a 3-inch house brush, and I'm looking mostly for texture here, which I'll be adding to. Okay, once again with our stippling brush, I'm adding some variation in the bottom, trying to keep the shadow there without taking the highlights out, so that we get a feeling for the coral that's going to be popping now as we get the mastic off. Okay, now that our third wash is down and dry, it's time to pick up the mastic, and just rubbing it off with a paper towel seems like a good technique. You get a little part of it that sticks, you can use your hand, but you'll see my drawings coming out underneath, and just a matter of pulling it all off, we'll get nice clean edges around everything. And look how our little fish up here are going to look as they come up. And it's quite brilliantly white against the blue background. And it's just what we want. We can make things darker, but we never make things lighter up there. Okay, we've got all the mastic up, and I'm going to use some Winsor Newton Winsor Yellow to put down a layer over the turtle. This will be the underlying layer in the turtle. Trying to be a little bit careful on the edges so it doesn't get into the blue. It's transparent enough that it's going to leave my drawing underneath, which will help me when I start to put the green scales over the yellow turtle. Okay, now as our turtle is drying, we can have fun painting little fish shapes using cadmium red and cadmium yellow, and all we're doing is letting the brush make the fish, keeping the cad red on the bottom and the cad yellow on the top, and trying to delineate each one of these little fish as a fish shape. Not trying to actually paint any one particular fish, but trying to let the watercolor do its work in blending the difference between the dark and the light into 2 or 3 little bunches of fish.
It's on.
Okay, now I've gone over the major shapes of the turtle with this dark green on top of the yellow, and I'm using a credit card to scrape back in the texture on the turtle itself so that the feeling of the paint is allowing a lot of the yellow to show through, but it's still acting like turtle leather. Green turtle leather in this case. I'm not being very specific. I'm just trying to make turtle kind of marks that will translate well when we move on from this with some browns. And in each case, the credit card is doing most of the activity, as you can see right there. Now, after doing our scraping, we can go back in and modify some of our paintings to get the highlights back in where the scraping didn't quite do it. And we're almost done with this little guy. We're just trying to clean him up a little bit and speckle him out a little bit, and we'll have a watercolor here of a leatherback turtle shortly. So it's just a matter now of finding those highlights and bringing them back to the watercolor. They've got a lot of spots on these little buggers, that's for sure. Okay, let's see how we're coming here. We'll put a little frame over it to see if we're getting the right direction. Yeah, we still got some details down here and a little more black underneath the fish, but you can see how the light is coming down on the top of him, so I'm going to have to put some highlight yellow in there. Thank you for your time.